right, we'll call the meeting to order of Board of Finance on June 17th, 2014. I'd like to start off with a Pledge of Allegiance. We can all rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first item, approved minutes of May 6th, 2014 special meeting. I assume everyone got that in their packet.
Yep, so moved.
Second.
Second. Any changes?
I defer to my esteemed colleague, Barbara.
No, they look good to me.
I had one question on number 7, where it says Mr. Leclerc noted that they are engaged. I think we should be more specific than they. I don't know who they is. Is it the Board of Ed or the superintendent?
Oh, I think it was superintendent.
Yeah, I think.
I think you said this, I think you said the principal too, but it says here engage.
Engaged with the principal, so who, it's just
Oh, the
not clear who
students.
they is.
Board of Ed?
Board of Ed?
Board of Ed?
Or maybe the Board of Ed and superintendent? It's just,
Tell us what you said, Mr. Leclerc.
Board of Education is engaged.
You can't remember?
The Board of Education is engaged to the high school principal?
not to, with.
I think that the board and the superintendent would be fine.
Okay.
Board of Education and superintendent.
You got that? So noted. All right. Any other changes?
No.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Minutes pass. All right, Long Range Planning Committee. One of our goals this year was to set up a Long Range Planning Committee, and when we did our goals, we had some long-range goals we had discussed, and which were prime for a Long Range Planning Committee. What I'd like to do tonight is just try to get it organized and get your thoughts on who should be on it. I'll tell you my thoughts if you want, and what the charge should be of the group and what they should probably try to come back with. Typically a 5-year financial plan, we're talking 5-year period, I believe we talked about, is you run numbers for 5 years. But you got to run the numbers with some assumptions and estimates. So you'd have to state your estimates. What does it look like, for the next 5 years? Knowing contracts, settled contracts, unknown, inflation, a lot of factors. We have a capital plan. That's a 5-6 year plan. What does it look like based on what we have now and some knowns that you can project out? On the revenue side, you have grand list growth. That's, you don't know, you're going to have to get some feel for that. State grants, how are they going to trend? Let's say they trend flat as a percentage, that will go down. Therefore, there'll be more dependency on tax rate to cover the difference. Local fees, interest. Hopefully later tonight we'll find out how to make more interest, but there's other revenue items that can impact the revenue side. And then finally, the tax rate is to fill the gap. So, in a nutshell, that's basically what we try to do. And then what I think we ought to do is look at, there's issues that are going to impact the next 5 years that we know of. And we don't know exactly how they're going to impact it, but we can kind of plan or project. And for example, like if the Hartford decides to tear down their building, that will impact things. And, when could that happen? And so worst case scenario, what could happen worst case with the Hartford? Best case scenarios, they get a new tenant, but maybe we have to offer incentives. So what would that mean? So there's some impacts there, and so we just try to project the timing of it so we're ready for it, and so we have some issues that we probably know could happen. You have declining enrollment in the schools. So that's impacting on the Board of Ed side when they do their budget. And I know there's been discussions, there's a building committee set up that's been studying buildings. So.
Facilities task force.
Facilities Task Force. So maybe some of that impact and what their thoughts are could come into this financial model. We don't know, whatever, if there's conclusions or some suggestions or direction could come in. We always have our classic underfunding of our pension and OPEB obligations, where we are, and, we've been working to shore it up, but what does it look like it's going to be 5 years from now? Are we going to be at a reasonable point, or do we have to put more money in it to get there? So we can look at what the actuaries projected. So this is our chance to look out where we're going. We have debt service currently at 7%. We've talked about lowering it. But will it restrict capital? And some of my thoughts are lower it from 7% of debt service to 5%, but still use 7% and pay 2% cash for capital instead of financing it. So it does impact capital a little bit. So, how would that work if we decided to do that? So this is where you can kind of model and look at, study things and just kind of lay out some numbers. We also have, we're talking about reserves, how much are enough, then what do we do with the excess? In this past year, we've allocated $955,000 to capital projects. So, but now we've lowered the collection rate, so what does it look like we could have for excess? What are we going to do with it? Where do we want to direct it? If we have an OPEB issue or capital to fit it into a new policy, there's many, many ways we can direct the money, but at least look at it. Also, we have the Affordable Care Act coming down the road. I don't have a clue what that's going to do to us. To be honest with you, maybe it'll do nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think it'll do much.
From a lawyer's perspective, I listened to all these, and I guess I'm thinking it's a fairly sophisticated analysis that you're talking about in terms of all these, kind of a multitude of factors. I'm not sure what we can predict. I mean, we can set goals, but I think it would be, in other words, if you're looking for some kind of roadmap for if A happens, then we'll do B, or...
Well, the main thing I think we're looking for is the 5-year model is just kind of same old, if we do nothing, here's what's going to happen. So that's easy. We can do that in 2 weeks. But now, the other impacts are, they're going to have a financial impact, and when will they hit? And what could be the outcomes? And with no decisions made, just here's an impact. You could talk about, we have now a defined contribution plan in there. If more people use that, what is that? How does that impact us versus defined benefit? We're starting to get more people sign up for defined contribution. As people turn over, the employees turn over. So there's an impact going on in the town. So there's a lot of financial things. Things are changing. We've set some policies in place. And what's that all going to do to our budget?
So Peter, you're trying to put together a subcommittee.
Yeah.
And will we have staff resources to do all this
Yes.
analytical stuff? And just going back to the list that Barbara and I created, are we figuring that, well, because some of these things already have subcommittees, like there is a pension group already looking at pension policy, right? And there is a group looking at Simsbury Farms, so do we?
I'm not saying looking at the policy, but using what they've seen to put it into the financial model.
Okay, yeah, I just
Because
want to
if
make sure
you
we're not,
don't, right.
that we keep the scope of this.
I mean,
long-range
another thing you
framework
have is Simsbury Farms.
doable.
I mean, well, here's what's going to happen. There's change happening. So these are areas of change that you have to keep on your mind when you look at it. Instead of
Right.
just doing same old, gee, we're going to go up 2.5%, let's run the numbers. Well, Simsbury Farms,
But I'm just saying,
Might
I don't
come
think
back
we need
into
to
the-
redo whatever
yeah,
that.
to the Board of
subcommittee is
Selectmen
doing.
budget, if that decision gets made
Yeah.
by our board. So what would that mean? And
So Pete, probably the one thing that we don't have today that we need outside help for, and correct me if you think you can do this, I've never seen the actuaries give us, the pension actuaries, really a 5-year projection on funding out 5 years and what it would look like and where we'll be. Because we have that tail we're catching up from, and I don't know at what point, I've asked that question more than once when they were here, when are we going to get whole? I don't know the answer to that.
Yes, I have that, actually.
You do have that, you can provide all that for us?
I think I already have it. If not, I can get it from them.
Okay, so that's probably the one piece that I'm not sure we know how to do.
Peter, do you want something that would be collaborative with the Board of Finance, Board of Selectmen, and
Board of Education. Right.
So people from this, so.
So I envision
two
two and two members, with the finance directors of each working with the group.
It's a good idea.
And then, obviously, the superintendent and the first selectman have to be apprised of working with their business managers, what's going on. So they see what's happening, so nothing's, so they kind of oversee it from what's happening with their board, what they're submitting. But it kind of gets three boards working together. Just what it does is it allows everyone to see, hey, gee, all these financial impacts impact the overall budget. And things that happen within their budget, we're trying to project the impact to the town. Because what happens is we come into budget season, and
Yeah, you
We
don't
know
wanna
of
wait till the
some
last minute.
things.
We need to be working on it now.
we gotta be,
So I'm just working off of the list that we did, which was based on everybody's input. What was listed for long-range planning issues was the reserving policy, that would certainly be in this group. Bonding and borrowing policies,
Yep.
road funding policies, and I think maybe, didn't that get its own separate little subcommittee? No, not yet, okay. Simsbury Farms, which is assigned
we got
elsewhere.
subcommittee, yeah.
Pension policy, which is assigned elsewhere. And communications, I'm not sure that really goes in long-range planning, but it is something we ought to do, so maybe need a separate group. And that's really it. Investment policies for reserves goes with reserve policy. in my opinion.
So I think that a little different. I don't know that we need this three-board group to determine the policies, but to look at what
Yeah,
we
to make
have right now,
recommendations, yeah.
right, and determine what it would look like if what we're doing today continues for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And how the numbers would look, and then what their recommendations are, given some of the changing factors that we know about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think it's more, and Peter, I don't know, you really thinking there's one plan, or maybe there's a few scenarios?
There's a few scenarios. I mean, there's not, a plan's, it's a moving target, it's not an absolute. It's just a guideline to manage off of. What I'd like to do is send one charge, though, to the committee, and here's the loaded charge. What needs to happen to keep the tax rate the same? Now, one of the things I'd like to suggest, and we had it this year, which worked very well, is we had both boards working together, and we had some savings of about $600,000. I would love to see that every year.
And
I mean,
states-
that's,
And state statute requires,
Yeah.
I know the Board of Education present that to us.
but I mean, there must be areas, we could have energy savings. There's a host of areas out there. With our new finance director, I know he's run quite a few ideas by, and maybe we can make a list of ideas of where people have to work, but it at least puts it on the table, that we have, maybe part of this to get the mill rate the same is, we have to come up with $400,000 of savings every year. And how do we do that?
Right.
Instead of just having a windfall one year and then going to sleep, we got to work hard every year. So
Yep,
let's start now
exactly.
and work hard.
I agree.
So, it's not going to be an absolute. It's not something that we're going to follow. It's a guideline. It's to tell us where we have issues, if we have deficiencies. We've done comparison to other towns, our metrics, and I'd like to, we're talking about getting metrics for our board to compare. So this is where we lay here's how we stack up mill rate to mill rate, compared to other towns, AAA towns, similar towns, neighboring towns, however we want to do it. We'll get some metrics in, so all three boards are seeing these. It's not just our board doing it in a vacuum.
I like the idea of it being a collaborative effort. I mean, obviously, then this board has the final decision-making authority on some of these policies, not all of them, but on some of them anyway. But I like the collaboration only because I feel like we all need to be on the same page, and if your mission or goal is to do what can be done to maintain a level mill rate, we really need everybody's buy-in. I mean, because the Board of Education, Board of Selectmen all have their needs, and they'll, I think, come forward and say, well, that's only part of their mission, but their mission is to advocate for kids and what have you, and so it would be great to do it together.
Also, what's going to happen is, we've been fortunate that the pressure on rising costs have been minimal the last few years. I know I went to an economic forecast today, we have somebody come in and speak, and it's probably not going to be that way in a few years from now. So I'd like to get on top of that and say, gee, when things start rising and maybe we're gonna make more income or get a little more growth, let's decide where we're gonna use that. Instead of saying, well, geez, expenses are just gonna go up to match it. So I want us to kind of control and set the direction and the tone for how we want things to be. We might not be able to keep the tax rate the same. It might not happen just because of contractual issues or whatever, but unless we look at it and model out, we won't know. And what I'd like to see is if we come back with some kind of plan and we got some numbers to start looking at, we're going to go into the pre-budget cycle November.
Right.
And then if we kind of say, gee, here's what it looks like 5 years out, that kind of sets the tone for, okay, now we're into this year. What do we want it to be? What do we want to see? What can happen to make it come out the tax rate the same? What has to happen? There's going to be some choices. Do we keep expenses in line? Do we have grand list growth? Maybe we have more grants. Maybe we earn more interest. Maybe it's a combination of everything. Maybe they found some more savings. We were very fortunate this past year. We had a lot of people working hard, and I think we had a great result. But I'd love to try to plan to have another good result.
Are you thinking, I'm thinking maybe the mission too would be refined after the three boards get together, but the mill rate is one very important component of economic competitiveness, but are you thinking that the mission might be broader, such that they would try to pull together information that would enhance Simsbury's economic competitiveness vis-a-vis comparable towns? Because the mill rate right now, we all recognize, has driven that analysis. I mean, I look over the line, I see the senior care facility that's going up right over the line at Avon, and I think it's a for-profit venture, and I'm disappointed that's not happening in Simsbury. But, the tax rate differential is probably a consideration for them. So that's part of it. But I guess it would be good to have a less controversial, maybe, goal, but one that subsumes.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, we got to
Be careful about mission creep. Let's
Well, we
not
just
make
wanna
it
get
such
it-
a big mission that
Yeah.
this group is like.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I mean, what I like to do is just go for a 5-year plan, throw out some of the broad items that we discussed before. If we have individual items that are impacted, decide if you want to address them or not. Leave it up to the group. And try to come back with a financial plan. But if we're asked, I'd like to ask it one hard question. If we had to keep the tax rate the same, how would we do it? What areas, how could it be done? And some of it might be like they do down in the state. Savings to come. I mean, if we get, the governor has balanced his budget with savings to come, well, maybe we have to find $400,000 of savings. Otherwise, we can't keep the mill rate the same. And that's, and if we can't do that, then we can't do it. But if we can do it, then here's what will happen. What I don't want to have happen is we get these savings, but yet we go spend it somewhere else. I'd rather try to control that to get some tax relief.
So the one thing that I'm concerned about is that we make it very clear about what we're trying to do. And I don't know whether maybe who's ever on this committee could work with the two finance leaders and sort of say status quo, here's the 5-year. And maybe we can start with, here's a whole list of things we can talk about. But at least you go to the group with something on day one, rather than thinking they're going to start talking and inventing, a 5-year thing. I think that we might get hung up. And the other piece I'm a little concerned about, and Burke may help me with this, I don't think the Facilities Task Force is going to be in a position to really add value to this until next year.
I think the target was to start having new data in the fall.
Is that for school facilities only?
Yes, but that's a piece of
Oh, yeah, for
the
sure.
conversation.
But I mean, some of this is we have declining enrollment. What does that do to the budget? I mean, right now, our board might have expectations because we have declining enrollment each year. We expect the budget to move correspondingly every year because of that declining enrollment. The Board of Ed will tell you it can't move, it has to move in steps. So this financial plan will show us how it moves.
When a step actually arrives.
Right. So I think it gives us the opportunity to understand that better so everyone can explain their position better. At least in a 5-year plan, you'll see where the impact, and if we have this study that shows a 2% drop for the next 5 years, when we have a 10% enrollment drop, what does that mean for us? So this gives us a little better look instead of the 1-year look, which is hard to see it. And a 5-year look, you can see that. It might not have, the facilities discussion in there, but with a 10% enrollment, it can start asking other questions. You might not have answers, but at least we'll have some data.
So how big a job would it be for both of the finance directors to put together a first view of a 5-year with whatever current assumptions are?
Listen, I'm absolutely gonna put together a model that'll base in some of the concerns that Peter already raised. That will
Okay.
give you guys the flexibility to be able to model it. So more or less, yeah, I'll be able to put together something like that.
And how about the Board of Ed side? Because enrollment, 5-year enrollment impact, I mean, that, building all that, when do you really see the savings? That's a lot of work, I would guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Joe's vision is of his model. We can certainly work together to try to provide, that outline, I think, that you're speaking of as a starting point. For me, it would
Do you have that kind of data, though?
end of the summer. I wouldn't have all of the data. I mean, if you're talking about what are the major drivers that you see in out years that would have to, that would have.
But you have to make assumptions, though. You have some data. We have a teacher's contract for
But
2 more years.
But not to the specific impact of, what is the enrollment and what is that? I mean, that's what the task force is
Right.
digging into, and will also be all of
Well,
that.
I think a lot of it's gonna have to be done, I mean, any of us on that task force, we're not gonna be able to do much in terms of developing enrollment projections. I mean, it's not in our
Well, no, those
skill
exist.
set.
But they have enrollment projections. They already have,
Right.
they've paid people to do them.
Or, yeah,
But they themselves have to take those into account. So the charge is, how have you taken these into account? What assumptions have you used for the enrollment? So what have you used for an enrollment drop? If you say, well, the same enrollment, that's probably, and you have a study that shows a 10% drop, then that's not valid numbers to give. So how have you dealt with that? Somebody has to start dealing with this, and where does it come in? And so
I'm just not sure, I don't know how accurately they can depict the out years. Like you said, we can make assumptions, but I just don't know. I think a lot probably depends on, I know you've had these studies done in the past, and you pay someone to update them, but
We do annual updates, but then there's been a deeper dive done on, different cycles, and, we've had more than one source of numbers in the past, and we may wish to do that again to get some updated enrollment numbers. But then there's also what's the impact on the program space of the modulars that we're in the process of taking down, phase 2 and 3, and so it's all those things together, as Barbara said, is not, it's not all gonna be available immediately, but we are gonna be working on those pieces that, relate to what are our needs for next fall, what is the actual, October 1st space, and, what are our opportunities for, really verifying what would it look like at a potential lower point.
But what you're gonna have is a start, you might not have absolute numbers, you might say, gee, I can't do this because we don't know, here's our unknowns. Well, as you get more knowns and the unknowns, then they can start getting ranges. So it gets people to focus on longer-term planning. I don't think you do budgeting 5 years out. I think you do, I don't know how you do your budgeting, but it forces people to look a little further out in their range, and I assume once the superintendent would have a lot of questions on what this means and what are we trying to do. I don't think we're trying to get an absolute plan that we're going to hold you to this, and here's what it is, but we're trying to get a range just to see what it looks like. If he says, gee, I know down the road that this is going to change in education, we're going to have to increase our cost 10% more because of some new program, we'll probably hear about that in this, at least.
So is this I don't think anybody's opposing the suggestion. I'm just trying to get a clearer sense of who's supposed to do what, because some of the things like, developing or rethinking the reserving policy or how we invest.
It's not rethinking a
reserves.
reserve policy.
We're what?
It's not rethinking a reserve policy.
Okay, because those were on the list of long-range planning things, the reserve policy and
We're
borrowing.
kind of doing that. We're doing that anyways. We're going to be approving that probably in another month.
Okay, so that's a sign.
But what you will do is, let's say we set a reserve policy, and let's say we pick 12%, okay? So now, if we're at 12%.
I get that. I just was, I'm working off of the list that was
Yeah.
developed, and I thought you said all those things were gonna be
Well,
done by this
we've-
committee, and I'm thinking.
No.
You don't really want the
No, you have
Board
to
of
take it
Ed
into
thinking about your
consideration.
reserve policy.
You just have to take it into consideration.
Yeah.
So now if we have the reserve policy at 12% and we have a collection rate that's going to generate some revenue, what do we do with it? We have some for contingencies and some we can use to solve some problems.
So I'm all in favor of doing this. It would be helpful for me if, you've got a clear sense of what you're looking for. If you could write down, not that we need that before we vote to do it, but that you write down a clear statement using the list of long-range planning things that was developed. Which of these long-range planning issues do you want this subgroup to address, and which are being addressed elsewhere, so that it's very clear? Because otherwise, I think whoever ends up will end up spending the first 3 meetings just trying to decide what their mission is. And I think it needs to be very clear and circumscribed.
Yeah, one part of their mission will be very clear, do a 5-year plan based on known factors. The second piece will be based on certain areas that we know something's happening, come up with a range, what could impact the financial plan. It's not a policy, it's not anything, but just a range.
Okay.
So if you've ever done a long-range plan, you gotta have assumptions. You gotta go out there on the limb and make some choices.
Right, and all I'm saying is that a number of these items that we all discussed as
Yeah.
things that needed to be addressed in the long-range planning process needed some research and recommendations about how do we, get more investment return on our reserves? How do we deal with road funding?
Well, that's why we have Joe
Yeah,
to bring in people and,
but we need those recommendations
Yeah, right.
in order to then
Okay.
do, so.
I gotta bring this back into context. Long-range planning is to spur constructive conversations about being a proactive manager, right? All we're doing is documenting assumptions, putting together a model, and it's a living thing. It's not a finalized project. You don't end up with something at the end of the day that ends up being your Bible. You end up with
Right.
some guiding principles
Sure.
that you can kind of turn back to and say, this is how we want to operate. I will help you guys through this process. I would just get the team set up and let's see what we discover.
there's some examples out there what other towns have done, cities and around the country. I've looked at some.
Do we have what Granby does? My understanding is they had a multi-board team that did this regularly.
I
Can
can
we,
ask.
can we check that?
So what I'd like to do is just get a multi-board, 2 members from our board, 2 members from Board of Ed, and 2 members from Board of Selectmen, with the finance directors on it, and just, even if they come with a 5-year plan, something's better than what we have now. We have nothing now.
Right.
At least we start to get a look, and we'll get a feel, and issues will change on the fly, and the group starts talking about, well, what impact does this do 5 years out? And it stimulates.
So you're looking for scenario analysis. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure at some point we move beyond scenario analysis and establish a policy about how we're going to get more interest off of our reserves and how we're going to
Right.
lower the debt service if that's what we decide. I'm just looking for where's the concrete output.
So the policy piece that you're talking about, I think of that as the role of the Board of Finance.
I do too, and that's why I wanted this to be clear. Yeah.
And the
I do
three-board
too.
portion is really to look at exactly what I think we just had articulated.
So that's what-
I mean, like
When
interest
do we
income.
get to
If you
those
look back
concrete items?
historically, we made $1.2 million in interest we used to make, back when interest rates were a certain amount. If you're a firm believer they're going back to there in 3 years, that might be in this plan. Now, doing nothing but what we did in the past will get us to $1.2 million by the economy changing. So things like that will happen if we believe it's going to happen. But if it's not and the trend doesn't show it, it's pretty hard to project that. So, but if we want to change how we do investments, that we'll talk about that later, I think our board should discuss that.
Yep.
But this is more of a financial feel. We need the other boards in for them to understand how their budgets impact the whole picture. And if we're going to come back and the group says, gee, what do we need to do to keep the tax rate the same? What needs to happen? They might say, well, gee, we just got to do grand list growth, and we'll go spend 4.5% and go find 5% grand list growth, and that will be it. That's an unrealistic expectation. So we need some realistic expectations. And usually it's a combination of everything. It could be, working together on savings. It could be controlling your budgets, with the drivers aren't making your budgets go, it's doing better contracts. Because once somebody sets a contract, and then they come in, they give us a compelling reason that, gee, I just gave away 8% of my contract, now you gotta give me 8. From our board, that's very difficult. We're kind of stuck with certain compelling reasons. I like everyone to focus on, gee, if we're gonna go here, maybe you don't give away the 8%, you wanna give away 2. Don't go negotiating what you did.
Right.
Because our hands are tied in negotiations. We don't negotiate. We just set the mill rate after everything's been done by the two boards. So, I mean, we can be hard line and say, you're only gonna get this percent, regardless of what you negotiate, and go figure it out if we want to, but I prefer not to do that.
With an arbitrator may say otherwise, forcing us to have to fund something that would be less reasonable than what they've negotiated. So it's, I mean, there are a lot of moving pieces. I agree with you conceptually. I would like to see something that comes out of this group, ultimately, the board that's policy making to give guidance to everyone, but I just think initially, we're gonna have to figure out how to work together, because I don't think everyone's gonna share the same goal of keep the mill rate the same. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think the Board of Education will have a problem with that if they believe it will degrade the educational system, and so I think we have to look at, competitiveness. There was a 25% goal, I think, years ago, of the town for diversifying the tax base, so that commercial tax base would help, pay more of the taxes and less of a burden on residents. And I think at some point, I don't know if they're still thinking about a goal there, but at some point, I think they concluded it's difficult with the mill rate, and it's difficult with the geographic location and all those other factors. And, we can make assumptions and do all those things, but at the end of the day, I think we want to provide guidance that people can live with and that the public will support.
Well, what I propose tonight is that we get members set up, we request from the other two boards that they send 2 members. We develop our charge, and we'll try to develop that in the next couple of weeks. We'll get that going. And then we can, if you want to formally pass it, or just get the group going and say, here's a proposed charge, and just come back with a 5-year financial plan. I don't know if we have to get too formal with it, how formal we have, but, and everyone can do their input, what their vision is, and then the group can kind of decide how they want to operate. But I think you basically understand, you can give some examples of what a 5-year plan is, so we come back with something that gives us some kind of planning tool to start with, and we don't have to make decisions, but at least gives us something to talk about. And if we find out that the Board of Ed, using them as an example, has all these issues and pressures on their budget, we'll hear about it. If we find out the Board of Selectmen might have pressures, if we change stuff on their budget, we don't know. So, right now, all we know is what capital is, and we set the mill rate when it comes to us, and we try to control the budgets and keep them in line. I'm just trying to get out in front of that, so we just see the next 5 years, should I worry or not? Something tells me I should be worried. So let's just, as long as we're going to be learning on the fly. It's not going to be a perfect exercise, but at least it'll be a start, and we can fine tune it. So we can get better every year. So it's like and then we can say, gee, how do we do this better? And then we can do it every year, kind of fine tune it. I say, because it's a working document. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
So now, I'd like 2 people to be on it.
Yes.
No.
Yeah, you said you had some thoughts. Do you have requests of which 2 you'd like to ask?
I'd like the 2 that I'm looking at right now to be on it.
How did I know?
Barb,
Long-term planning.
This group, I assume, will be meeting during the day, too, given
Yeah,
the involvement.
that's fine with me.
Well, so just the one caution, I don't intend to be in town a lot over the summer.
We can conference call you.
Barb, neither do I, don't worry about it.
Yeah, right.
Well, the group can work many ways. I mean, you can work through email, through
We're fine.
calls.
It's subcommittee, we can work through emails.
Okay.
Everything's pretty mobile these days.
And I also think, I want to go back, because I feel like when we asked at budget time what the impact of the next fiscal year is with the union, with the contracts that had been negotiated, we didn't get that until the night we were ready to vote on the meeting for the town side. And I know Board of Ed had it kind of early for us, but just 1 year's worth. And I mean, it seemed to me it was a lot of work to model out, just alone the contract assumptions for what we've already negotiated, not even the new ones, but, you know, just for what we know right now. How long is it gonna take to just get that one piece? So that's like, we gotta get that piece right to start this whole analysis.
That'll be this summer, and then you'll be back.
And I'm looking at you because I think it's work. Is it something you
You're
can?
saying next year, you're saying what is our likely need for next year's budget for staffing?
I'm-
Based on the impact of both contractual obligations as well as potential staffing changes?
So step one is, by itself, here's your baseline is this year's budget. You have an adjustment for contractual obligations for the next period of time that your contract's been negotiated. What's the impact of those? They're gonna, I assume, cause the cost to go up if all the staff stays the same. So what's that's an add to, and what is that add to? Then separate from that is the whole, here's our enrollment projections, and there's staffing retirements that we anticipate at X a year, and there's headcount needs we're gonna be able to adjust again because of the enrollment decline. That's all pieces that you can in theory do now with some
Talking about
assumptions.
15, 16,
Talking about 5 years.
and then beyond.
Yeah,
There's gonna be some work.
right, and that's why
It's not an absolute, though, it's a guideline. It's not an
well,
absolute.
that's right, it'll change.
So it's just modeling to see if we do nothing, here's what it could be, and if we, you gotta make assumptions, 10 people are gonna retire each year. I don't know what it's been historically, in the Board of Ed side, on the town side, I don't know.
Yeah,
what.
right
Look
now,
at their ages.
actuaries
We
are
just die.
saying
We don't
2.7.
retire, we just die.
Great. That's not a
Let's
good,
not
that's not a
make that
good way to do it. That's not what we're gonna assume. But, it's a model. It's financial modeling. It's not perfect, but it's just to give us a look. If it comes in and all of a sudden we say, gee, everything's up 6% a year, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Is that real? And so you gotta step back and see what it looks like to see if it makes sense. We gotta look at the expenditure side, and we don't have to do it by every line item. You do it in broad categories. So
Don't
you,
worry. We
On
won't.
my side, guys, at least the town side, I'll make it as easy as possible for you guys, so you guys can actually talk about the philosophical. And you don't have to dive down into the individual line items. I have forecasts that I put together when I was in West Haven, it's not all that complicated.
so I think we can, we can start seeing what it looks like, and then,
Except for Obama.
we'll plug into, we'll
Can you
send,
work with Burke? Because I think his is a
His
little
is
bit
harder.
harder.
Well, he's got.
Right. A lot more
5 times
people.
as many people.
Exactly.
I mean, by helping you point and laugh, or.
and Colleen's gonna collect 102% of taxes every year.
So he can feed you some information to it, maybe it would be helpful.
I can show him how I would frame it. I mean, everyone's mind works different. He's got a better handle
Coming
on
to
it than I do, probably. But yeah, I'm
Presentation
always
wise
there to
is
help.
what I'm interested in, maybe what you're referring to, just
Yeah,
how you,
absolutely.
how you would be planning to present it,
Yeah.
using a similar framework.
Absolutely.
We want to do
So-
high-level presentations, not,
Never thought I'd hear those words out of your mouth, but I'm more than happy to oblige.
You'll contact the other two boards and ask them for designees and let us know.
sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay. So send a request to them and get some designees, and then maybe Joe can show what we've got, and we start just looking at it and seeing what the end product's gonna look like, and, it's a working process. It's something new for our town. We were asked at one of our meetings, do we have a 5-year model? One of our public audience, and the answer is no, but we're gonna have one. We're working on it. We have a 5-year capital plan, but we don't have a 5-year,
Right, it doesn't
business
fit
model.
into anything.
Yeah. So this is gonna try to make everything fit a little bit. It's not gonna be easy. It'll be awkward, but we'll work through it. And you're not gonna be just on your own, trust me. There'll be,
You won't get much if I am.
there'll be some guides, I'm sure, anyone else who wants to
Good at
weigh in
financial
can weigh in. It's not gonna be, in a vacuum, and, we can all weigh in and throw our 2 cents in. So, all right? That sound reasonable?
Sure.
Okay, good. Finance Director's report.
You're obviously seeing this for the first time. You can ask for one as well. Like I said, short and simple and to the point.
Thank you.
It's kind of how I typically function. Lynn's probably gonna find grammar errors. All right, so for now, I kind of kept the format very similar to what you guys have received in the past. Started off updated collection on tax, or update on tax collections. Through the end of May, you guys were at 99.3, 99.28. I tend to rounding quite often.
Sorry, Joe, can you talk slower and louder?
I can definitely talk louder. So, assuming that you guys collect at the same rate you did last year, you guys should be right around 99.47. It's a little bit less than I told you last month. You guys didn't keep pace with last May. May was slightly off. There is some activity that Colleen just sent over to me today that could help a little bit, but I think that was only like 60, 70,000.
What do you project it will do to reserves? I mean, we're over, how much are we gonna make over budget on?
I have that,
Oh, you got that somewhere else?
on the next page.
Gotcha, okay.
So I will go back to, I just gave revenue, just the way you guys had it. Investment policy, last time I came before you guys was obviously the night of the high school. We had talked about me speaking with our financial advisors, allowing them to change the allocation so it fit within our policy. We've done that. We're now in compliance with our policies. Simsbury Farm Subcommittee. It's moving. I think we actually got a lot of traction last time. Peter talked a little bit about it tonight, about how there will have to be some conversations around the selectmen's budget, probably absorbing some of this in the future. It's not gonna be something that happens this year, but we are forecasting fiscal 14 landing right around $200,000 negative. And it's surprising, because I've gone over there 3 times in the past 2 months, and man, that thing's always full. That's a busy facility. So,
What we've done is another member here is Mike Payne's in there, he's on the subcommittee, and Nick and I are on it. But basically what we've talked about is, 4 or 5 years ago, we reallocated the overhead. So we have a study from other towns, and all other towns who have special revenue, 100% of the overhead is absorbed by the town on the admin. So we're the only town that allocates it. And we went from a 50% to a 70, so we kind of bankrupt the fund by doing that. So we're thinking about just don't allocate anything. Unfortunately, for the selectmen, it puts it back in their budget. Now, on the equipment side, if they want to buy all this equipment, they should pay for it. They, Simsbury Farms. So we're talking about that, so that puts 50,000 back in their budget. So the net might be 150. If they're short 200, they got a business problem, and they should find the other 50,000. That's what we're talking about happening. So then we debate whether you keep Simsbury Farms the same or you break the golf course out. So that's where some of the conversation's been going. So that's where we are. But I think we're going to probably recommend putting something back into the selectmen's budget, which the selectmen might not like. But our board can say budget it this way if we want.
Are user fees part of the conversation too?
absolutely. My insistence. No, I'm sure Peter.
Seems
will
like that's an opportunity to make up some of that shortfall.
You know, I think the facility itself, it'd be challenging to keep profitable with what you guys have put up there, but we'll come back with the findings.
Well, I mean, it is, I'm just speaking for myself, it is a service to the town. We don't expect the library to break even.
No,
And they've
absolutely.
got twice as big a budget. And there are lots of town people who use that facility.
The way I frame it
And-
with Mary is you guys receive $2 million in benefit for the cost of $200,000.
Yeah,
So, and it attracts people to this town. I can't stress that enough.
I agree.
I think it would be useful for the Board of Selectmen, from a policy perspective, maybe to come out with something very different, because what I've heard over and over again is, well, from the inception, it was always to pay for itself. It was to pay for itself. We break even when it was passed, how many years ago? How, was it 25 years? It's 20 years? That's what, I mean, Joan has mentioned this many times, so I think it would be useful to have the elected officials say, based on their view of what this community wants and needs, to make a statement about whether it should or should not remain break even. I certainly have no problem with supporting it as a service to the town, much the way we do for the library, but
Mhm.
it is a break with at least the original stated.
And something else has come out of this subcommittee, and you'll see a request in here. I think it's on our agenda for, under Parks and Recs for open space. So there's, as we keep acquiring more open space, Parks and Recs is saddled with that, so it's putting a huge strain on their budget, so we have to, there's gonna be something else set up to address that issue too. So it's a moving target.
Yeah.
So that's not fair. We're not being fair to Parks and Recs right now, so we gotta do something there. So there's a lot of things coming out, so we'll let Joe go on, but we'll keep you posted.
Next part, I kind of kick right back to you guys. Rules Committee. I'm new, some of you guys are new. It's probably time to revisit all the rules that you guys have.
We had no rules, so that's why we set up a rules committee.
Yeah.
I thought we,
Oh, sorry.
didn't we,
Yeah, we
Well,
did.
assigned to?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just wanted to put it on, so the rules committee, Moira and Jeff.
I've got the rules for the Board of Selectmen, and I came up with a conceptual idea or language for a rule that would address Peter's, the scenario that Peter discussed, which is what happens in the event that there's a tie in electing a chair, as we had this year.
Gosh,
And-
whatever made you think of that problem?
And how it, right, how would it be addressed? So I can just, for informational purposes, if it's okay, just send out
Yeah. I mean, if you guys
conceptual
work
idea.
through it, just send out people so they can start seeing if they can want to weigh in on it. But our goal is to have some rules in a few months, because we had none for many years, so we should just try to get some rules to operate, basic rules, and
Yep.
so we know how to elect chair, when we elect chair, and how we operate.
For
So,
example, they follow Robert's rules of
Yeah.
procedure, so,
Yeah.
we probably do for the most part, but I'm not sure if there's ever been any formal enunciation that we would, and if that's the case, we probably should have Robert's rules here, and we're gonna have to consult them from time to time.
Okay.
All right, next part, estimated reserves.
Can you toss?
Okay.
So similar to last month, about $1.3 million more going towards general fund. You guys will be favorable, about $1.7 million in revenue. It's a decrease from last month. So I put in there the Simsbury Commons settlement. I believe that's about to be signed off on the next couple of days. I'm gonna reserve for it for this year. It's $217,000, because it covers this year and the years past.
What was that?
That was the tax appeal,
On assessment appeal.
Board of Assessment Appeals. sorry.
And is that a net amount, or is there a future impact too that we
There's a
need to worry
future
about?
impact, but that's off of next year's collection. It's about 183, and Joan will correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't remember what you told me, but
I gave it.
the number is about right.
Yeah.
Don't we use, in our, when we set the mill rate though, don't we have a reserve anyways?
You have,
In
yeah.
there? So we had a
It's
reserve
not
built in.
fully- Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
fully reserved, but
Yeah.
this was a pretty large change.
So we'd be adding,
But the good news is this year, even with that adjustment, we're still about $1.1 million.
Correct.
Get added to reserves for that. Then you have Farrell's Farm, the land sale.
Correct.
That happened?
Farrell's Farm land sale happened, $480,000. It came in. We'll talk about it after, but the Board of Selectmen would like to schedule a joint meeting with you guys to discuss whether or not the town would like to set those funds aside for other purposes. Expenses, the expense forecast that I gave you has about $400,000 of additional cost. It's mostly the transfers, right? The negotiated salaries of $344,000 that you guys are aware of, the fiscal year 14 snow budget. This is an updated forecast and went up about $8,000 versus what was told to you guys in April, or maybe it was March, because I think there was one additional snowstorm. Agreed upon procedures, this is part of the transfers that you guys are looking at tonight. And then the big number is the Simsbury Farms fiscal year cleanup. That's the deficit in that fund through the end of fiscal 13. So that is 235 through the end of last year and another 200 for this year. So don't think that they're, inclusive, they're exclusive.
What's the contingency in operations?
You had $150,000 in contingency, so the salary impact wasn't entirely $344,000. It
Gotcha.
was 344 less the 150. So you had some reserved for it. So that shows up as a favorability, Peter. I could have netted the amount, but
Gotcha.
then when you looked at the transfers, it wouldn't have made sense to you. And then operations, just, you guys actually had a lot of open positions. You have some general favorability that's out there, nothing with healthcare or anything like that, but a few positions here and there, finance director position being open for a while, Sean's position being open for a while.
So you feel good that there's going to be some turnback,
Absolutely.
even after all these?
It looks like between the farms over the 2 years, even with the turnback offsetting the other expenses, we've already spent the Farrows Farm money.
I'll just tell you, there's an extra 400 and something thousand expense from Simsbury Farms, but yeah.
Okay. But right now, so you got 1,700,000 to the plus, 400 to the minus, so that's 1,300,000 plus, right?
Correct.
That's what it looks like. And then we allocated 950, oh, you got that, I'm
So
sorry.
down below, capital projects update, all right? I think I told you guys the last time that I was having some difficulty tying out some of the fund balances. Essentially, what I meant by that was my beginning balances in my accounting system did not tie to my ending balances in my audit. It's kind of a big no-no. So I had Bloom Shapiro come in 2 weeks ago, and we're making progress. We're gonna put in the correcting entries, feeling very comfortable that I don't have much exposure out there. So one project I am willing to kind of give you guys, because the fund balance has been tied out, is the high school project. You guys have $670,000 in that capital account. I would say that you can do what you would like with it, but I would prefer that you guys would use those funds to offset capital borrowing on Board of Ed only projects. Reason being, I have to disclose in my audit what has been authorized, what's been issued, and what's outstanding for debt service for school projects. So if I keep it in the schools, it makes my life a little easier.
Besides, that's what it was approved for, you probably have to keep it in the schools. We'd have to look at the bond language
By vote, we can do just about anything.
without going to the town, even though it was bonded with a restriction on usage.
Yeah, you guys had a lot of, in this project specifically, you guys actually had a lot of what's called bond premium, which is when well, I'll let Stephen probably explain it better, but essentially investors pay a premium for your bonds. So if you borrowed $1 million, you got 1.1 million, although it wasn't quite that high. I mean, it wasn't quite 10%. But you guys could do a lot with it. I would just prefer that you guys kept it within capital. And
But something we have, it's like reserve money that we're going to use for capital.
Correct.
So it gives us a way to fund certain capital projects in the future or right now.
Yep.
So
And then-
this would be one of the budget transfers that we would make tonight?
No, I don't have a transfer before you guys. I was going to allow you guys to actually have a discussion on what you guys wanted to use that money for. And,
Wouldn't we just move it anyway to reserves and then,
no, because it's in capital.
I see. Oh, because it's in capital now.
Yeah.
So we could transfer to another capital
So-
fund.
Correct.
Right, so instead of
Right, okay.
bonding for capital, we
Yeah.
just pay that.
So
away.
I'm still, sorry, it's the lawyer in me. I'm still a little uncomfortable because that bonding language is specific, and I want to understand how we can not follow the bonding language with.
I've already brought it to bond council. They were okay with it. They sent over language for us to sign off on. Myself and Mary have signed off on it. I have not talked to Judith again today, and I understand there's a conversation Peter and I have to have, because we have differing opinions on something. But I've already cleared it with her. We're okay.
Okay, can we get that in writing? Can we see what she said in writing so we can all
Yeah,
That's what
I
I
can give you a
asked.
copy of it in my office.
Okay. Can you just provide that to the whole board?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, and then I gave you guys a list of all the projects that you guys approved, the 955,000. This is from fiscal 15 budgeting. If you wanted to redirect some of the money, you could probably use it towards that.
So right now, if this came out the way you said, we'd have 1,320,000 up above, 955 we committed out of next year's budget out of reserves, but it would get in this audit. So we'd have about 365,000 being added to reserves at the end of this year, if it came out this way. Okay, that's about where
That's
we're
right.
at.
Yep.
So we're still adding to reserves.
Yep. And still not earning enough interest on those reserves.
Peter, tell me the math that you just did. You took 716, subtracted 396.
No, yeah, 1760 minus 396 to come up with 1320, and then minus 955 to get 365. Okay?
365?
Yeah, $365,000 of
Draft, but
Uh,
it's also zero
increase
for
the
the town of Fairfield.
reserves, it looks like right now.
Which would bring us up to,
Moves us up third of a point,
12?
12, over 12 something. Okay. So I mean, the good news is we have reserves, you know, we have turnbacks, and even though we had some issues in transfers and overruns, that's why you have, you know, a little, so to speak, cushion, flexibility in your budget. Even with that flexibility, we came out all right. Now, in the future, we aren't gonna get as much on the tax collection side, because we lowered the collection rate, so in the future, that will be down 400. We won't sell Farrell's Farm, and the other, I'm not sure you can always count on that. So, you know, we weren't gonna be looking, but when we do our financial projection, we'll see what that, how it could look like, how.
It made sense to do this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and we're all still missing the Board of Ed impact, if any, to these numbers at year end. I don't know. Do you guys have a feel yet where Board of Ed's coming out?
We're still expecting to break even. It's a struggle this year.
You mean you're that favorable that you're not sure how to hide it, or I can help?
Burke's been playing, doing magic there to make it come out even.
It's all right, I can work on the dark side too.
We would prefer not to utilize, certain grants and other options, but that's kind of where we're at, so.
I didn't hear you. We prefer
We
not
have
to use
two,
some-
we have 2-year grant,
Grants, okay. I didn't hear the
and that's
word.
one of those things that we would typically try to keep the same amount, roughly 50% carried forward to the next year, and we don't have that luxury in order to stay even. And that puts us in a starting point for next year where you don't have as much flexibility.
I capped that well. Reserve policy. I gave you guys a draft. Jeff and Barb and myself are still working on it, but I'd open it up to you guys as well for any input that you guys have. I can send it to you electronically. And I'm not even gonna make a joke on that.
But we're still work in process, so when we get it, then we'll present it to the board, and then my recommendation is when we get it presented, we then sit on it for a month and everyone can really look at it and then make a final decision.
That's fine.
You know, because it's, you know, we want to be careful, it's a major policy, and I want everyone to feel comfortable with it. I don't want anyone to feel like we rammed the policy through, so let's, you know, we've been without one for this long, we, you know, wait a month or two to get it right.
Health insurance. This will probably be the last update until I actually come up with a recommendation in regards to your OPEB reserve. You guys aren't seeing the same favorability that you saw last year. It's not there. You guys are coming in right in line, maybe even slightly above. Doesn't have an impact on your operating budget because it's your internal service fund, which already has a very healthy balance. You guys had some cataclysmic claims. I think you guys are okay, going to be okay for fiscal 15. Fiscal 14, you definitely saw a higher volume than I've seen. I mean, it's higher than I saw in West Haven. Just
Because last year, we
Luck of
transferred
the draw.
700,000 to OPEB, and we still had money go to reserves.
I think you had three or four claims cap out, which is 250,000. Over that were insured. It's a big number. Next two, they're in my report, but it's going to be mostly Burke on the first one and Stephen Sams on the second. McGowan Fund, you guys are aware that we received 479,715 as a, I don't know, left in a will. My only thing is I'm not actually sure how it's going to be reflected in the audit yet. Peter and I have had conversations. I've kicked it over to Bloom Shapiro, but any questions I would definitely direct towards Burke.
You may have read in the paper some conversation about it. The board at its most recent meeting, after having several conversations about potential uses for the money, asked to hear about the possibility of how to utilize only interest to benefit on an annual basis, so that the legacy of Ms. McGowan would be able to live on in perpetuity. And so after talking with Shipman and Goodwin, talked about the options of establishing a trust versus the school activity fund, and that seemed the more straightforward way to utilize school activity funds, which we currently have under board policy. So The difference would be this one would be district-wide as opposed to a specific school. Each school has its own, and those are audited and under state statute, part of the town audit process. So we would, the first step was to designate myself, the business manager, as the treasurer of that, because each one of these student activity accounts has to have a treasurer under state law, and then to also authorize me to seek some financial guidance on how best to try to maximize annual interest. And then in the fall, the next step was to amend the board policy and create more specific process on how the board would consider use of that money on an annual basis. And the board.
So that's a definitive decision that you're not going to spend the principal, you're only going to spend the.
That is what they,
The,
that is what they
interest.
indicated that they would like to do. And so then they would create the actual sort of policy and procedure when they take it back up this fall. And I think their interest is kind of having direct involvement in it, almost like a committee to be set up that would then consider possible uses of it, and on an annual basis be able to make that decision.
Accounting-wise, Linda, it's not a trust. It's not legally restricted, the principal. It's restricted for a certain use as far as general education. As far as now the board is internally designating it or committing it
Right.
to these purposes, so there's no legal commitment to it. So accounting-wise, it's interesting how they're going to deal with it. So,
Yeah, and my just one comment is having worked with a fund previously, that was left as a bequest in another foundation that I worked with. Things change a lot over time. So as an example, the one I worked with was established by a family before Medicare was established. And fast forward 70 years later, establishing a fund to help old people with their health bills was a great idea at the time and was pretty useless now. But they were locked in because of the language. And so trying to find a way to make it useful. So that's my only caution, is just think about the possibilities of how education funding might drastically change in the next 100 years when you're setting up your language for restricting the use of the money. Because
The use is essentially already restricted by state statute as to what a student activity fund can be used for, the benefits.
But my point is, there may not
So I
be a
don't think
student
they're going
activity
to-
fund 100 years from now. I mean,
Right, I
who
don't
knows?
think, and I don't think they're gonna be bound by their own policy. I think
Yeah.
their own policy can be,
Okay.
they can change that the following month, and they can go spend it all if they want.
Okay.
So there's
Yeah,
no
I think you just-
outside restriction.
you
It's
want the
all internally
flexibility. Yeah.
restricted. So what you do internally, you can undo.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I just want to get for our information, just so,
Bonuses for everyone on the boards and commissions would be a great idea.
yeah, right.
Is it 479?
Actually, you guys are elected, right?
47, yeah, the number is
It's in
47.
It's in Joe's
Is
report.
it?
Just kidding.
Kirk, that's the number, the 479?
715, and 40.
Receive the money?
Yes. That was back in the fall, and that was accepted by the board, and they've been looking at it.
This is a draconian investment that you guys have, and I'm gonna have Stephen come up and introduce himself and
Thank you.
educate you guys in the fall on municipal investing.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the board taking the time to consider some options when it comes to investments. So I think Joe wanted me to take some time to go through not only some options, but also talk a little bit about Morgan Stanley. Maybe what I'll do is just start by introducing myself. So again, I'm Stephen Sams. I'm a financial advisor. I'm also the branch manager of our branch in Newport, Rhode Island. And I work with a team that consists of my partner and myself and a number of other individuals. And the primary focus of our practice is the investment management of predominantly operational and general fund cash portfolios, as well as trust fund portfolios for municipalities. We focus our practice in largely the New England GFOA, or Government Finance Officers Association type region, so the 6 New England states, and we also work in New York State. So our familiarity with state statute is pretty deep. I have a conversation with the general counsel of the state treasurer's office periodically to make sure we're up to date on the general statute code, to make sure if there's any changes that we're in line with the expectations of the state. On top of that, Joe alluded to it with the investment policy he just handed out. We also consult on investment policies for those various types of pools of money. In particular, the governmental and governmental and proprietary funds, which is very typical of the clients' monies that we do manage for them. So that was sort of a very brief introduction. My partner and I have 25 plus years combined experience working with municipalities. I've been with Morgan Stanley for going on 5 years. He's been there for roughly 6. His name is David Javahari. He works out of our Wellesley, Massachusetts branch. He's an executive director, and he sort of predominates the lion's share of this type of business in our firm. And I'm talking a little bit about some differentiating factors for Morgan Stanley versus other firms, but what I'd like to do maybe is just talk about some options. What's going on right now with investments? How can municipalities move forward, generate more income off of the monies that they do have to invest, that take into consideration the primary 3 factors that most municipalities have to live by, which is safety, liquidity, and yield, in that order. We focus our practice on making sure that we have allocated funds appropriately based on your cash flow and your liquidity. That's all driven by conversations that happen between us and the powers that be, typically the finance director, who, by your own policy, is mandated with the oversight of those of the monies. But what we try to do is make sure that future liabilities are met by the ultimate maturities of the investments that we're making. By and large, most municipalities have a general fund that may or may not have the ability to carry over excesses from one tax collection period to the next. That's where we focus our role as investment advisors. So what we attempt to do is make sure that if you do have excess float or excess capital that you can put in to some sort of investment, that's the money that we're focusing on. So if you look at your policy, you'll notice that there are sort of 2 different sections as far as my reading and understanding is concerned. To talk about the operational or general fund cash, you may have pooled monies. We haven't really talked in depth about the fine granular details of that. That money is stipulated by Connecticut Statute 7400. So what that limits you to in general are FDIC insured products, also limited to government securities. So that would be U.S. Treasury, bonds, notes, bills, and also U.S. government agency securities, which would be the likes of Ginnie Mae, Freddie Mac, and so on. That is the extent of the type of investment products that we typically recommend, and there's a big reason for that. We'll go back to the safety, liquidity, and yield. Number 1 is safety. We have to look for those securities that offer you either full faith and credit back into the U.S. federal government or some sort of insured product like what you would get at FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So it's not a terribly limited field to choose from. There are many different flavors of ice cream, as we like to talk about. You just have to know how to use them and you have to be able to access them. So going back to Morgan Stanley is one of the largest originators or dealers in fixed income products in the United States. So whether it's a certificate of deposit, an agency security, a treasury security, a lot of the other firms out there are actually buying that product from us in order to sell to their clients. We work direct, and it gives us the ability to work at a scale, at an institutional scale that other firms may not be able to. So kind of back to the investment offerings. One of the things that we can do is analyze the interest rate environment from one cycle to the next. They do tend to be cyclical, and you'll notice that interest rates rise and interest rates fall. Over the long term, we've been a very sluggish, bearish, downward trending interest rate environment for nearly 30 years. If you remember back to the 80s with Paul Volcker, when interest rates were at an extreme, you may recall, in the teens for money market rates. Those days are over. Money markets are now at basis points. I think stiff is now at 1.5 or maybe 2 basis points for overnight funds. One of the things that we like to do is make sure that we're getting you an appropriate amount of yield for the safety and liquidity that you have available to you. So number 2 is liquidity. That's the second consideration. When it comes to liquidity, what we're attempting to do is make sure that if you do have a cash need, a surprise cash flow event, you have the ability to liquidate the funds or liquidate the investments that you have invested so that you can take those monies out and deploy them appropriately to whatever the need is.
And so do you look back over time? I mean, we've got pretty healthy reserves.
Yes.
And if you were to look at the last 50 years, you'd probably find that we never dipped into those reserves to consume more than, I don't know, I'm guessing 20% of them.
Right, and kudos.
In which
So-
case, 80% really, or at least 50%, doesn't need to be liquid at the drop of a hat, because you're
that's-
just never going to go there.
That's the role. That's the goal, and that's the role of finance director under the purview of the Board of Finance to obviously structure your capital allocation appropriately.
So some is
that-
less liquid.
Right,
Yeah.
so that we avoid that altogether.
Right.
Point being, if for some reason there were an extraneous event, a black swan event, a
Storm
Newtown type
Alfred.
event,
Storm Alfred.
Storm Alfred, we need 4 million.
Yeah, but we had, what, 12 in the bank, so that's.
We went down to 5, if you look at our rating agencies at that time, we only had 5 million excess.
Okay,
We're
so
at-
you used less than 50% of it.
Right.
one of the elements that we try to do is make sure that we have the ability to make a market in those securities that you own, so that if there were an emergency need, we could obviously liquidate and sell. So there is price risk involved. If you went and bought a CD at your local bank, you're locked in. You could get out, but then you'd have to pay
Pay
probably
penalty.
a fee and then maybe pay back some interest and so on. With secondary marketable securities, you don't necessarily have to do that. We don't charge any fees for that type of transaction. There are no fees to have an account. There are no fees to maintain the account. The only thing that we do is advise you on the price risk involved if interest rates have risen, the value of the bond has gone down. Therefore, if you needed to sell and interest rates have risen since you purchased, then there may be some decrease in principal that you could have back. But if it's an emergency, it may be warranted. So that's up to the decision of powers that be. So,
Provide, was it 10%?
What's that?
I think our policy provides 10% of assets being liquid within a 24-hour
Yeah, for the
period.
overnight securities, I believe it was 10%, correct.
okay, so on to yield. Talking a little bit about what else is out there. How do you generate, and this is the fun part, how do you generate some income on your investments? So our perspective is this. There are a variety of different products you could use, but they don't quite fit what works for a municipality in terms of the safety and liquidity. There's a major competitor of ours, I shouldn't say major, there's a competitor of ours that really focuses on mortgage-backed securities, for example. We're not so keen on that because
Gee,
although
why
legal and
not?
allowable, there are, and my background is actually in mortgage-backed securities from a prior career. I actually help manage investment portfolios for credit unions, and that's pretty much all they do because they very well understand the mechanics of making a loan to a homeowner, because that's what they do. Mortgage-backed securities tend to be, as well as a variety of other investment options, tend to be highly complicated, require a lot of analytics, may possibly have some credit risk, meaning the originating entity might have its own credit risk. And then furthermore, you kind of weigh that versus the yield opportunity. They might not yield quite enough to make it worth the extra work involved for the investment. Great example. Is anyone familiar with Ginnie Mae? GNMA. Okay, so Government National Mortgage Association. It's not a U.S. government agency. It's actually a department or I forget the exact term. Bottom line is those securities are full faith and credit backed by the U.S. government, which is beautiful because they issue mortgage-backed securities. The problem is that the yield on those mortgage-backed securities is less because there is less perceived risk on that security because they're backed. That yield on Ginnie Mae mortgage-backed securities puts them sort of on par with what you might find in a CD, for example, which is also fully faith and credit backed, not by the government agency, but by FDIC. There's so much more work involved in analyzing the cash flows on a mortgage-backed security that it's at that point it's not worth it at all. And so our approach is to analyze where we are in the economic cycle, understand where we are with regards to interest rates, and sort of the relative pendulum of value between CDs and U.S. government agency securities is such that it kind of just swings back and forth. Right now, we just happen to be over in the CD camp. CDs from a variety of different FDIC-insured banks put together in a sensible type of maturity time frame or ladder can usually outperform a portfolio of agency securities.
What's the range, the average range right now?
So on a 1-year CD, you're probably going to be about 50 basis points, all the way out to about 5 years, which would get you about 2% or 200 basis points. 50 basis points is 0.5%. And that was sort of what spurred the conversation about the investment policy, which I'll defer that to Joe. When it comes to evolving the portfolio, there are other competitors of ours that do primarily only CDs.
That's pathetic.
Or primarily only agency securities. And they will set you up in that and just roll it along. We prefer to let each maturity roll off, evaluate where we are in the interest rate cycle, establish where the relative value is at that point among all of the different sensible choices that we've narrowed the field down to, and then make our decision about where the next investment should be, taking into consideration the cash flow that have, cash flow analyses that have been performed. Trying to think of anything else. I guess I should maybe take some questions. I've thrown out a lot of information.
What, as far as, this is to Joe, what, as far as if we, right now, what do we do?
You have to engage in your investment policy. You guys, it needs to be revisited. Right now, I have a 9-month window that I'm allowed to invest in.
Yep.
Can't have any securities that exceed 9 months. So that puts me on a curve of,
Yeah, that's-
0.7, 0.6.
Barely.
So
I assume you're going to come back with a recommended change to our investment policy?
yeah, I've actually taken one and started hacking at it a little bit. I'd be more than happy to give you guys a draft of it.
Well, we're not going to decide it tonight.
Stephen and I actually both went to the same resource for this, which I found kind of funny.
And I don't mind sharing that resource if for reference, it might put into perspective where we're coming from. So, among other Connecticut communities, we've worked with Norwalk, Connecticut for almost 10 years. My partner David Javahari manages that relationship with the controller of Norwalk, is Fred Gilden. And Fred has been kind enough over the years to accommodate us for various requests, including sharing his investment policy. We like it. We help draft it. We manage his portfolios against it. He runs a $60 million commingled pool portfolio. All of his different funds are run under the same policy with the same constraints. One of the notable elements is that, and this is what we recommend across a lot of different communities or municipalities, is that the average portfolio maturity is 5 years. So long as there is an average life of the maturity less than 5 years, we're good. That gives us a lot of flexibility. Now that raises concerns for some people because they say, oh, well, interest rates are going to rise. And we've sort of been living under that specter now for 5 or 6 years. We have the benefit of a lot of interest rate analytics. We have research analysts that publish reports practically daily on where they believe interest rates are going to go in the short, medium, and long term. We've heard estimates anywhere from mid-2015 to 2018 as far as any beginning of rising interest rates. I tend to believe we're closer to that. I've heard rumblings that tomorrow the Fed is going to come out and start getting a little bit more hawkish on interest rates, perhaps hinting at a future or more imminent hike in the Fed funds rate. Now, what does that mean for interest rates for us?
not a whole lot. We probably have a 6 to 12 month lag between any incremental rise in the Fed funds rate versus what we would see in the agency treasury CD type of market. In that period of time, your entire portfolio would have matured and already been rolled into something new. So the interest rate risk that you could be taking on, I think, is relatively limited, even if you extended the portfolio maturity to 3 years, let alone 4 or 5 years. What that flexibility allows us to do is, this is very important, it's kind of twofold. Morgan Stanley originates a lot of the different offering deals that come out of those issuers. So Freddie, Fannie, the U.S. government, and also a lot of the FDIC-insured banks. Morgan Stanley is helping to create those bonds. So we actually go out on an institutional basis, make them, buy a big chunk, carve off slices for people like Dave and myself, for our clients who are municipalities. A chunk gets sold to another firm, another chunk gets sold to another firm, another chunk gets sold to an endowment for a university. Bottom line is that we get the benefit of, number one, creative products, but we also get the benefit of institutional pricing that we then pass on to the client. So one of the creative product ideas that's out there right now, we ran across it the other day, is what they call a step-up CD. And I'll go back into why this is important, but when interest rates are rising, you want the ability to reinvest your money at higher interest rates. So you either want to have what they call optionality, which is you get the money back from your bond investment because it's called, or you want to have flexible interest rates. If you go in, are you going to want to have an adjustable rate, or do you want a fixed rate? You want to invest in an adjustable rate, which is why a lot of banks are issuing adjustable rate mortgages again. They want to be able to let those interest rates notch up as the environment pushes them up. So as an investor in these securities, this type of what they call callable and step-up type of certificate of deposit is very important because it'll get called, or you'll be allowed to step up as interest rates rise. So it was a 7-year, callable in 1 year, and it was 2.25% for 7 years. That CD will not be around for 7 years. But for the 1 year that you do own it before it gets called, you'll be getting 2.25%.
Yeah, which beats the heck out of what we're getting now.
Now, you balance out that 7-year investment with a bunch of 1-year stuff, and it sucks down the average life of your portfolio to below 5 years, or below 4, below 3, whatever the policy states, and you get the benefit of that higher rate with staying in terms of the policy. So there's a lot of guidance that we can provide to help sort of build in the flexibility, but also kind of boost things a little bit while maintaining the safety, the liquidity at the same time.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Let's do it.
So, Joe, as far as action here, we're,
I don't know that you'd have any action before you, unless you want to.
not tonight, but I mean, you're gonna keep moving on this policy?
So
We can't do it without changing our policy.
Correct.
Typical next steps are, and I was at I was at a client and 2 prospects already today, so you're my 4th visit for today throughout Rhode Island and Connecticut. Typical next steps are, I would continue the conversation with Joe. We would then come up with a policy that ultimately receives some sort of approval. We continue to hash out the variety of different funds that you have available. Either they're trust funds that we can manage in a prudent investor type manner, which we do on a regular basis. I'll lapse into fees and how we get paid in a second, because I know that's important. But in terms of the general operational fund monies, we can also establish sort of what's available for investment. For example, we put together a sample portfolio in May that showed what a sample 10-year or $10 million portfolio would look like over a couple of different scenarios. So one scenario, I believe, was tranched out 1, 2, and 3 years. A second scenario was tranched out, I believe it was 3, 4, and 5 years. But we can create those on a relatively fast basis. So next steps would be sort of continue the conversation, and we have a very streamlined type of account process.
So we don't invest through you now. Who do we invest through? Or do we?
It's at Simsbury Bank. Money's just sitting in the bank doing that.
For that money that is liquid, our money markets stick. We're not competing on money markets. We don't compete with STIF. We have better rates than STIF, but we're not out there to try to compete for your money market business. We're not a bank. We're a bank holding company, and I'm a subsidiary of that as a broker-dealer, but we don't offer lockbox operational. So you need to have a bank relationship still, where either your liquid cash needs to stay or you put some in STIF, whatever there's options out there for that. We don't do that. We deal more with those investments that are what I would call long-term.
Yeah.
Okay?
So the required portion that's short-term is the 10%?
Yeah, 10% in the fund, I'm sorry, in our current investment policy, yes, we require 10% to be liquid. What he's saying, I don't know that you necessarily need it, because it sounds like I can convert cash pretty quickly, so the 10% would just be sitting there doing nothing. Something we can think about. I don't believe I left the 10% in the revised that I gave you.
So in terms of next steps, we first need to revise the policy.
Correct.
And then, I'm presuming there are other guys like you out there, do we have to do an RFP and all that sort of thing and go to several?
It's a bit.
Or can you
That's the big one.
assess which one gives you the best
Yeah,
package?
I've met with a few of them already. There's actually not many companies in the state of Connecticut that are very good at this. There's a couple that are trying, but most of them don't have people that are doing the municipalities. It's really a small pool.
Okay.
I brought him here because I felt confident.
Yeah.
Didn't use him when I was in West Haven, basically because I didn't have cash. But he impressed me from a year ago.
So we would like to understand the fee structure and how that
Absolutely,
works.
absolutely. And I appreciate that, Joe, which was all news to me, so I thank you for the
No, you
information.
knew I didn't have cash in West Haven.
Well, I knew you didn't have cash in West Haven. We did connect nicely about a mutual Rhode Island connection, which was nice. So there are two different ways that we could do business. Number one is what they call on a transactional basis. Would you mind if I close the door?
I got it.
Is that right? Okay. One is on a transactional basis, where we act as a broker, and we
buy and sell the securities for you out of either Morgan Stanley's inventory of product, as I described, since we're originating a lot of that product, or we go to the street and ask other investment firms for what they have in their inventory, and we find the product that fill the needs appropriately, and build the portfolio on what we call a commission basis. So it's simply a transaction cost. Here's the thing, though. The transaction fee is built into the yield. So if I say, hey, Joe, here's a 1-year CD at 50 basis points, and we're going to buy you $250,000 worth of this bank in order to stay under the $250,000 FDIC limit, he gets $250,000 of a 1-year CD at 50 basis points. How does Morgan Stanley get paid? Morgan Stanley is buying that CD at a little bit more, marks it up, which ultimately reduces the yield, and then we sell it. It's called net of yield pricing. It's very straightforward, very common industry practice for buying and selling bonds for clients.
Will we see that each transaction, what you make?
No,
You have to disclose it to us?
we do not have to disclose it. You can thank Dodd-Frank for not catching that one.
I know in the
There's a lot they
pension.
did catch, they didn't catch that one.
I'm sure they caught it and they got lobbied out of it.
Yeah.
So, the other way we could do business, which we don't tend to do, is on an advisory basis or on a fee basis. You may find that your pension or your OPEB is run that way through an investment consultant. We generally don't do that simply because there's no fee that we could charge you that's low enough to have it make sense to offset the low yields that you're getting today. We can't charge you 10, 20 basis points on it would erode the yield that you would get on the portfolio, so we just don't bother doing it that way. It's just not possible. We've never done that way because it's more effective for the client.
What?
However, there are, oh, sorry.
We have to summarize here, because we got a lot on our agenda, and we got an anxious group out there getting a little restless.
Oh, okay, sorry. So just to wrap up, For those funds that maybe are invested via prudent investor, we handle those a little bit differently. If you have the ability to have a more diversified portfolio, we can work through the pricing so that it's advantageous. But generally speaking, when it comes to fixed income portfolios, it's always on a transactional basis.
So
Okay.
why don't you'll come back next meeting, we'll put it on the agenda for policy and, decide if we want to go out to bid or not go out to bid and who you want to use. Because you're going to have to work with them
Yeah.
wherever you use, so and we'll try to do something so we can
Yeah,
stimulate the investment.
move it
And we'll
along.
try to get some numbers so we can get maybe here's what it looks like, you get a lot to look at if we look at all the assets, because we have more than our reserve cash. There's a lot of cash in Simsbury, if you look at the top level financial statement.
Yep.
And so there's a lot that's gonna happen here.
Good.
Okay,
470,000.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you have a card for us? Do we have a presentation so people want to do some due diligence or anything?
Absolutely. I'll
I
just,
want to know more about the 2.25.
Yeah.
You caught Barbara's attention here.
Yeah, really.
That's new to me.
you have one?
I know.
Like 5 years.
Oh, you do? I'm generous.
Get it.
Thank you.
Look, you even have the address on Bellevue. That's nice.
Thank you.
Would you folks?
No, I haven't.
We need one with,
No, I meant for the
you have one for the,
reference, okay.
for our
Have
minutes?
capacity
taker?
everyone serves, so.
Which mansion is that?
I was gonna say, I was like, that's my home.
It was actually an old sporting goods store. That was like a ski shop.
Are you up high? Yeah, you're up high by the Talbots up
Story
there?
than that.
Yeah, so Talbot's and beyond, it's past the.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I know. where that
It's by the
lives,
Stop and
yeah.
Shop.
Yeah, okay.
So, anyway, have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, we appreciate it. So that was very enlightening, so I think we have some opportunities there.
There's a big group out there waiting
Yeah.
to get in.
All right, let's move on. We're all done with your report, Joe?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to appoint the auditors. Is there,
I make a motion, we appoint, who do we have in front of you?
Bloom Shapiro?
William Shapiro again.
Second.
Any discussion? And then for what period, Barb? Can you just make it
It's for 1 year.
1 year? Okay. All
Do
those
we,
in
do
favor?
we have, what, can I just say, do we have the option to appoint them at this rate for more than 1 year? I thought they only offered us a 1 year extension.
I can extend it 3 years with them at the current rate, if you wanted to.
But we
So,
can do that again next year.
if they offer us again next year at the
No.
current rate.
They'll keep going on that for a while.
They will?
Oh, yeah.
I just didn't want to lose the
It's a
opportunity to
good-
keep
it's a-
them flat for 3
It's a
years.
competitive rate. If they were to bid it, it might come a couple thousand higher, but I could probably get them to extend it for at least 2-3 more years.
Okay, if you say so, I'll believe you. But, I mean, if you can lock them in with a flat rate, that seemed like it might be worth doing. I know we haven't competitively bid it for a few years, so,
The rates,
But we're
very
not-
reasonable knowing the pricing out there in the market.
I'm just-
I mean, Nick wanted to make sure we bid it, so I think if we go for a year, I
Okay.
don't think we'll get hurt, and gives the opportunity. Joe felt comfortable because he's new to work with the current auditors, he's got a lot of issues to resolve, a lot of problems to straighten out in our records, so I think it's prudent to keep
Okay.
the auditors, so I think.
oh, I
it's-
agree with keeping it. My question
Yeah.
was keep it longer, just
Just keep it
because
for a
we-
year, I understand about pricing, but then a year from now, we'll have everything straightened out, and then we
And
can.
we really do have an obligation to the town
Yes.
to
Yeah.
bid.
Okay.
And it's been a while, so
And that'll make the
I'm
price go
more than okay with it.
it might, but.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Auditors appointed. All right, action on this tax expense. We have to approve this transfer to suspense that Colleen, tax collector, gave us.
I make the motion, we approve it.
Do I have a second?
Second, the amount of 54,504.28.
That's it, the 54,504.
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, whatever the bottom line is.
Can somebody
Discussion.
explain
Just
it?
explain, why don't you
If
explain
you know
suspense?
anybody on there, could you let me know?
I looked for you already.
Thank you.
Why don't you
Sorry,
just
I
quickly
didn't-
go through for
Explain what it
suspense,
is.
what we're doing here?
Basically, it's the accounts, it's cars and personal property. Either, most of the people obviously have moved out of town. It's not that it's not still collectible, I think what we are going to do is we are gonna go with a collection agency and give them our suspense list. It doesn't cost the town anything.
Sure, and they just take a percentage of whatever they manage to drum up?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
I just didn't know what, the way it was written, I couldn't quite figure out what you were asking us to
We
approve.
typically do this
You're
every,
asking us to approve the write-off, or you're asking us to approve
No, approve
the
the
collection
write-off.
agency?
Approve the write-off. What I'd like to do is, we met with this collection agency, and I'm gonna give them a try, and give them, from now I'll give them their suspense. I mean, they'll do, not just suspense, but I thought I would give them the suspense to see what they can collect on it. If they
So
can
why
find the
write it
people.
off if you're still pursuing it?
We've
We're not
been
writing it
pursuing
off.
all of them since the tax office has been doing it since they were due. We can't find the people.
Right, but you're giving it to a tax collection agency to pursue.
Right.
So we are still pursuing it, we're
Oh,
not
yeah,
really
if
writing
we,
it off.
right, if we still continue to look for them too.
we're just moving it to another list.
Yeah.
From an active list to an unactive list, but
Right.
there's still a list.
Right.
Okay, so you're not writing it off?
No.
Okay.
No, it's still a collectible, it's still collectible.
Someone said 1 minute ago that we were writing it off, so that's why I thought we were.
We're transferring it to a tax
Right,
suspense list.
to a tax expense.
Okay.
And most of it is cars.
Does that show up on our books, so? Right, so we really are writing it off, so let's be careful on how we're using
It's
it.
no longer reflected in the tax collector report.
Well,
Right.
no, but,
It's a-
okay, the tax collector.
It's a suspense.
It's in suspense and it shows on the.
Yeah. So, I mean, the bill still shows in the system.
Yeah.
If
I
there's a
still
lien on the
collect
house,
on
it's still a
them.
lien.
But it doesn't show up as an account receivable somewhere.
No,
We only recognize revenue based on what we collect in
cash.
Yeah.
60 days past.
Modified accrual.
Modified accrual,
Right.
right?
One thing I do need to touch on, because kind of peeked a little bit, with the collection agency, they do not get a portion of what we collect, they get to tack on a percentage.
Right.
By
We don't lose
Connecticut
anything.
general statutes, the maximum is 15%.
So it's not a contingency fee, okay.
There is zero cost to the town.
Yeah, the
It is
town.
all
right.
paid for by the
We still get all the
taxpayers.
tax and all of the interest at 18%. Yeah.
18%?
18%
want
per
people
year.
to
State
little
statute.
delinquent,
That's what
not too
state
much.
statute is. You should have changed that.
I'm serious, it's like,
Yeah, and then
Not-
they tack
not
on
in the 80s when we set
15%.
up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, transferred. In essence of time, do we have to do the budget transfers tonight? Or can we do them next
You
week?
can do them next week, then.
I'm not that comfortable doing those yet. We haven't closed the year, and there's maybe a couple that I'm okay with, like snow removal.
Well, these were all the ones that were brought up to you guys in the past, that's why I
Yeah,
wanted
but
to
there's
do them
that
before
other,
they-
there's,
I mean, we don't have to, we don't have to do them right
all.
now. We can still get them in the budget cycle next month.
right.
So in essence of time, why don't we just move them, is that all right? We do them next month? That sound reasonable?
Let's put it on the top of the agenda, though.
Top of the agenda for
So we
next
get to
month. Right.
Okay.
Henry James update. I'd like to get the update there because we owe Henry James an update.
Okay, you have in your packet a memo and a copy of the presentation that was given at a recent Board of Education meeting. And our principal at Henry James, Brian White, met with a number of stakeholders, students and others, explaining more in greater detail what was really planned for the overall hallway improvement project. And after the conversation, the Board of Ed would still like to move forward with the scope as was outlined, which includes asbestos abatement and new flooring, locker replacements, lighting, and ceilings. One of the reasons that we would be requesting information and your hopeful funding of this is that we're also working with the Public Building Committee now on both the Squadron Line Main Office Project, Henry James Main Office Project, on selecting the architects and also applying for the state grant, which is due June 30th. It's an online application. And we do believe that it would make sense, if this is going to be funded, to package that with one architect for the Henry James scope of work, and we may be able to get some state reimbursement for the asbestos abatement piece. It would just make sense to package it all at that same time. I've worked with Dave Holden recently because he'd been through the process many times over and discussed scenario with him, and he thought it made sense to try to package it. So that's kind of the summary of what we're looking for this evening. And if you have further questions.
Okay, so when you met with everyone, you did the objections and the survey, or the people that signed the petition, are they satisfied? That's what it needs?
Brian had a series of meetings with multiple groups, and there were certainly people who still said, well, I think my lockers are fine, and that's as is summarized here, and there's others that said, oh, I was confused about what I was really signing, and what, my concern was somewhat different about, was I gonna get an up and down locker, was I gonna have a different size locker? One of the interesting things I found was that in terms of where they would like to see changes in the appearance of their hallways, to have more of the student artwork displayed, as they kind of recalled from their K-6 schools, is that the overall locker project to remove and consolidate lockers would actually allow us to do that, would allow us more open space in that first floor. So I think it's just one of those situations where you're not going to get
Do you
a
think
list
it's
of 100
beneficial?
people to agree on every last
But was
thing.
it beneficial to communicate? Did you feel that at least there's a better understanding?
Brian did. He felt it was a good opportunity to hear other concerns about what they'd like to see, not just the hallway project, and some of those were mentioned here, and thought it was a good teachable moment. So.
Is there an ask from us right now on this one?
280,000.
To do what? Where are we getting the money from at this point?
That's gonna be a question to Joe.
I mean, I would use the money that was left over from the high school project. So you guys would have to decide whether or not you wanted to go ahead with the project. And if you did want to go ahead with the project, I would come before you guys with the transfer at the next meeting.
So we can say we want to go ahead, vote to go ahead with it. We're gonna find the funding, the funding sources are either transfer from there or come out of reserves.
Okay, so the money in the high school fund is
400 and something.
sitting where right now? Is it in reserves right now?
No, it's sitting in that capital project.
It's authorized money sitting there, all funded, just
And in the bank somewhere?
and in the bank.
Correct.
So I would move,
So that makes sense to use it.
so I move that we approve
Yeah,
the $280,000 allocation, capital improvement for this project, which is for interior hallway improvements, first floor.
At the junior high.
At Mary James Memorial School. Is there a second?
Is there a second?
Second, you didn't say where we're getting it from, you just said that we approve it.
Well, we're gonna approve it
We'll do that
first.
next meeting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so you second it? All right. Discussion?
I just want to say I'm glad that the discussion occurred. I'm glad that the Board of Education also had an opportunity to hear again and for the deliberations to occur. I think it was useful, and I think the delay was important because it otherwise would have foreclosed what I think is important democratic dialogue. As much as the chair of the Board of Ed was very upset that we would dare to push it off.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. So you have what you had from us.
Okay.
Next meeting, we're gonna get
I'll do the transfer.
where the transfer is coming from, so that will be on that. Joint meeting request. We have a request in here to have a joint meeting, or there's about an open space. That's one of the things we found from Simsbury Farms. Did you give anyone anything on it?
I did not. So I feel like I'm kind of in the middle on this one. Board of Selectmen wants to have a meeting with you guys. They want to discuss setting up a fund to manage your open space going forward. I have one memo that Jeff Shea sent over to me. It didn't cover it in its entirety, and I wasn't going to share the one that had the dollars on it. It just looked too preliminary to me. But basically,
Can I just ask a question? Is this something that has to happen tonight? Because
Nope.
there are a lot of
No,
people
no.
looking in the
No,
window.
but they
We
did want to have
can
this
agree to
meeting.
have the meeting
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah.
That way we go forward. That's
Yeah,
all
I
he's
think we
asking
should have
is
the meeting.
agree to have the meeting.
Do we have a joint meeting, or do we just want to set up a representative? Do we have to have both boards sit and talk about this? I mean, we gotta hash out what it is. I
From
mean,
you guys, what I would do is I would send 2 or 3, but I would probably place you at the seat.
there's many ways to fund what people want to do. You can put it in your budget, that's one way. You set up a special revenue fund in which monies come out of it, but you have to get monies into there. So you have to commit monies over to it. So things have to happen. So we have to decide, as a request, I guess, to have a joint meeting. So we can say, fine, we'll have a joint meeting, or we recommend you get 2 people from each board working out a solution and bring it back to respective boards. What's the pleasure? What do you feel the need to have a joint meeting, everyone sit down and talk about it, or do you want 2 people to work it out?
One joint meeting is fine. Let's do that.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds reasonable. Barb, your thoughts?
Sure. I don't know if we really need it. I'm thinking I don't want it till September, but I don't know if we really need a meeting, but
I think it's a big
Well,
enough, I think it's a
hopefully
big
it'll
enough
be a pretty
issue.
quick
It's-
one.
Something to put in context, guys, you guys have purchased a lot of open space, and you guys have severely challenged budgets. Not saying who
Right.
bought it, who did what. You guys are gonna be taking over the Ethel Walker properties, you guys are gonna have, you guys are gonna have to determine what you wanna do with it, and there's a potential you're gonna have to put a lot of money into that and other facilities. I mean, this is an opportunity that you guys have to set up something where you might be able to manage your open space.
One thing I recommend is if we're gonna do this, we get some numbers and what the purpose is of what we're setting up. I mean, you flash the schedule with some numbers, but there's not just maintaining, there's improvement, there's a host of stuff in here. So,
I
Which is scary.
understand, what you're asking is what I've asked for as well.
yeah, so I think what we need is some preliminary, we get it, and we'll set up a meeting that's convenient for everyone, probably before our next meeting, when we have our next meeting. Does that sound reasonable? Okay,
can we try and do it the week of that same week?
we'll coordinate it, find out what's good for everyone's schedule, and you'll coordinate that,
I mean,
Joe?
if possible, I would either have it scheduled on Board of Selectmen night or Board of Finance night, so have it right before.
Yep.
If you
Can we target
set a time.
before our next meeting as a possibility? Thank you.
Okay, any other business? Oh,
I want to change our starting time so we don't keep doing this to,
well, somebody, we
I'll
shouldn't,
I'll be honest, you guys need to just block off 2 hours. Your
Yeah.
meetings don't go for an hour, so
Right.
shame
But-
on whoever's setting it up. for
but that's been set up all year. They have this room at 7:30 and this is like the 3rd time we've not let
Yeah.
that commission start their meeting.
All right. I'll work with Joanne or whatever board that is.
the other business, the annual report is done. I don't know if it's officially been copied. I mean, I got one that I printed off our firm printer,
I haven't
but
seen it.
supposedly it's about to be,
Yeah, I don't think
Printed?
it's out yet, yeah.
I don't think it's out yet, so when it gets out, everyone should get a copy. It looks nice. Everyone did a great job. Jeff and Moira did a great job writing our, what we said. Our picture looks nice, and I say the person that wrote the report did a good job.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I make it? Yeah, second.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
Who made the motion, Jeff?
Jeff?